The wind howled against the ancient stone walls of Huntingdon University, its mournful cry echoing through the deserted corridors of the old dormitory. Room 204 sat at the end of the long, narrow hall, its door closed, the brass numbers tarnished with age. The room had been empty for years, untouched, its secrets sealed behind that worn wooden door. Most students avoided it, spoke of it in hushed tones, as if merely mentioning its existence could bring forth something terrible. For Room 204 had a story, one that the university preferred to keep buried in its past. It was a room like any other, once. A small, cramped space with a narrow bed, a rickety desk, and a single window that overlooked the barren courtyard below. But in the late 1970s, Room 204 became the site of an experiment. A psychological study that was meant to probe the depths of human fear, to explore what happened when the mind was pushed to its very limits. The experiment was led by Professor Malcolm Wythe, a man whose passion for his work bordered on obsession. The students who volunteered for the experiment were told very little. They were to spend a week alone in the room, with only a few personal belongings and a journal to record their thoughts. The room was equipped with a single light bulb, which would flicker on and off at random intervals, and a small speaker hidden in the ceiling, through which white noise would be played. The goal was to study the effects of sensory deprivation, to see how long it would take for the mind to begin to unravel. What they weren't told was that the experiment had another, darker purpose, one that even Professor Wythe kept hidden. The first night was uneventful. The student, a young woman named Julia Everly, bright-eyed and eager, sat on the bed, writing in her journal, her thoughts calm, her nerves steady. She had read about experiments like this before, had studied the effects of isolation and sensory deprivation. She thought she knew what to expect, but as the hours passed, the light bulb began to flicker, casting strange shadows on the walls, and the white noise from the speaker grew louder, more insistent. At first, it was just a mild annoyance. Julia shifted on the bed, trying to find a comfortable position, her eyes darting to the corners of the room where the shadows seemed to dance and stretch, like fingers reaching out for her. She shook her head, dismissing the thought, blaming it on fatigue. But then she heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible over the noise, a soft murmur that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. She sat up, her heart quickening, her breath catching in her throat. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. There was no answer, just the steady hum of the white noise, the flickering of the light. She shook her head again, chastising herself for being so jumpy. "It's just the experiment," she muttered, lying back down, closing her eyes. "It's just my mind playing tricks on me." But the whispering continued, growing louder, more distinct. She could hear words now, garbled, distorted, but there, voices overlapping, intertwining like a chorus of the damned. She sat up again, her pulse racing, her skin prickling with cold. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice more forceful this time. And then the light went out. Darkness swallowed the room, thick and oppressive. Julia's breath quickened, her eyes wide, straining to see something, anything, in the pitch-black void. Her hand fumbled for the edge of the bed, her fingers clutching the rough fabric of the blanket. She heard a creak, the sound of wood groaning under weight, as if someone or something was moving in the dark. She felt a presence, close, too close, the air growing colder, the hairs on her arms standing on end. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, and she reached out, her hand trembling, fingers grasping at the empty air. And then she felt it, cold, clammy, a hand closing around her wrist, tight, unyielding. Julia screamed, pulling back, her heart hammering in her chest. The light flickered back on, dim, casting a sickly yellow glow over the room. She was alone. The room was empty, but the feeling of the hand on her wrist lingered, the cold touch seeping into her bones. She looked down and saw it, a faint red mark, like fingers, bruising her skin. She stumbled to the door, her hand grasping the knob, turning it desperately, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. Panic surged through her, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Let me out!" she shouted, pounding on the door with her fists, her voice echoing down the empty hall. "Let me out!" There was no answer, just the flicker of the light, the hum of the speaker, and then a soft, low laugh. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the room, vibrating through her very bones. She pressed her back against the wall, her eyes darting around, looking for the source of the sound. But she saw nothing, just shadows, moving, shifting, like figures dancing in the corners of her vision. The days passed, and Julia's journal entries grew more frantic, more disjointed. She wrote of hearing voices, of feeling hands brush against her skin in the dark, of seeing faces in the shadows, twisted and grotesque. She wrote of the cold, of a darkness that seemed to seep into her very soul, of a presence that watched her, waited for her. She wrote of a figure in the corner, a man with hollow eyes and a twisted grin, who stood there, silently, watching, waiting. On the 5th day, Julia stopped writing. When Professor Wythe came to check on her, he found the room empty. The bed was unmade, the journal lying open on the floor, the last page covered in frantic scribbles, words that made no sense. The walls were scratched, deep gouges in the plaster, as if something had tried to claw its way out. There was no sign of Julia, no trace of where she had gone. The university conducted a search, but no one found her. Her disappearance was ruled a tragedy, an unfortunate accident, a student who had perhaps wandered off in the night, lost in the dense woods that surrounded the campus. But those who knew, who had heard the stories, whispered of something else, of the experiment that had gone too far, of the darkness that had claimed her, of the spirits that lingered in room 204. After Julia, the room was sealed, the door locked, the key hidden away. The university never spoke of it again, never mentioned the experiment or the others who had gone before her. But those who lived in the dormitory, who walked past the door late at night, swore they could still hear it. The soft whispering, the sound of nails scratching against the wood, the faint, echoing laughter that seemed to come from deep within the walls. And sometimes, if the night was still enough, they could see her. A figure standing in the shadows, her eyes wide, her mouth open in a silent scream, her hand outstretched, reaching, always reaching for something just out of sight. Room 204 remains locked to this day. No one goes in, no one comes out, but the whispers continue, growing louder, more insistent. And those who dare to linger too long in that darkened hall say they can feel it. The cold breath on the back of their necks, the faint touch of fingers on their skin, the sense that something or someone is watching, waiting just beyond the edge of the light.